Welcome to season 3 of Changing Room Thoughts. Hi, I'm Karina. If you've never met me before, I'm the host of this podcast, Changing Room Thoughts, which is for anyone who has ever had a critical thought about the clothes they put on their body. I do a new season every quarter. This is the 3rd season, which means we've been doing the podcast for 6 months now. Crazy, right? If you're someone who has always been interested in fashion, whether or not that's your profession, or you've just kind of always had a closeted fascination with it, this podcast is for anyone and everyone. I upload new episodes every other Monday morning, so you have something juicy to listen to on your way to work. If you're a longtime lover and listener of the Changing Room Thoughts podcast and you have not yet joined our Discord channel, I highly recommend it. I'll put a link to the Discord server in the description box below, where you can DM me, start discussions about fashion, and we can kiki and discover new ideas. By the way, I would love to start a recurring bit on the podcast called Ask Karina, where you ask the questions you have about fashion that plague your mind. It can be anything from how do you methodically get dressed for work every day, to what is a culture in fashion history that you wish you knew more about. Anything and everything. I want to hear your questions and be able to facilitate a dialogue. I love when you guys reach out to me and tell me what you think about the podcast. On to the episode. Guys, this is a really exciting season of Changing Room Thoughts because it's almost summer. Spring, summer is my favorite era of fashion. I feel like summer in New York just brings about a certain energy. Ironically, I say that as I'm in California in my nature girl era for the last week and a half that I've been here visiting for some family time. I am so sorry if today's audio quality is a little bit weird. I lost the SD card for my podcaster, so I can't use my mic. I'm in my mom's closet right now to try and deaden the sound, so hopefully it sounds okay. The other thing that is really exciting about spring and summer fashion is the Met Gala. Also, last year, really excitingly, I had the privilege of attending the Met Gala watch party hosted by Instagram, and that was a dream come true. After doing a couple months of fashion commentary TikTok, I was like, I cannot believe this is my life. I've always been so fascinated by the Met Gala, so today we're going to dive all into it. Today we're going to talk all about what is the Met Gala, why do we care so much, the Costume Institute, the structure of the Met Gala, who decides, who goes, how do you pay for tickets, how do you get invited, and most excitingly, this year's theme. I've got my notes on my handy dandy iPad, so let's get into it. Okay, number 1. What is the Met Gala? The Met Gala, or Met Ball, formerly called the Costume Institute Gala or the Costume Institute Benefit, is an annual fundraising gala held for the benefit of the Metropolitan Museum of Art's Costume Institute in New York City. And if you've never visited the Met, obviously highly recommend. It's a massive museum, and also one of the few museums that has fashion exhibits. Of course, New York being in the fashion capital of the United States makes a lot of sense. But what's really interesting too about the Costume Institute at the Met Gala is it houses more than 33,000 objects, representing 7 centuries of dress and accessories for men, women, children, from the 15th century to the present. It is the largest and most comprehensive costume collection in the world. To date, the benefit has raised more than $223.5 million for the Costume Institute under the leadership of Met trustee Anna Wintour. And if you don't know Anna Wintour, she is the editor-in-chief of Vogue. You can actually search the online catalog to see all the different kinds of articles of clothing and fashion, jewelry, accessories that they've collected over time. And it's really fun, to be honest. There's definitely enough content in there to make endless costume galas. The proceeds from this event go into preserving fashion history. However, one of my criticisms of the Costume Institute and the Met Gala is that fashion history and collecting from these institutions tend to focus on Western lens of fashion. The Costume Institute has an overwhelming abundance of French, British, Italian, American, Spanish, Flemish articles of clothing that they've collected throughout time, but relatively little when it comes to Central Asia, East Asia, Middle Eastern. And since America is a melting pot of culture that is represented by so many different kinds of people, I kind of wish they put more effort into collecting and better understanding fashion throughout those places, because if we're going to talk about history, right, the Middle Ages in Europe were more or less known as the Dark Ages because of the plague, because of crumbling Roman Empire. What often gets glossed over during that time is the fact that the Silk Road was flourishing. Central and East Asia and the Middle East were all thriving during this time. And I really hope that we don't lose that aspect of fashion history due to us just glossing over those cultures. So that is one of my criticisms of the Met Gala and the Costume Institute. But if someone is better versed in what exactly is in the Costume Institute and I am dead wrong, please let me know. But from historical Met Gala themes, that's just what it seems like. I mean, of course, there was that one Met Gala theme, China Through the Looking Glass, which was meant to celebrate Chinese fashion and Chinese fashion history. There's this everlasting debate about whether or not it was culturally appropriate. I think the Met Gala orchestrators put some effort into bringing in Wong Kar-wai, the famous Chinese film director, in advising on how to avoid cultural appropriation, but it still happened. If you watch The First Monday of May, which is a documentary about the Met Gala, it follows Andrew Bolton, the Costume Institute's lead curator, and Anna Wintour as they orchestrate and organize China Through the Looking Glass. And in that documentary, I kind of have a bit of a bone to pick because Andrew and Anna travel to China and they are questioned by Chinese media as to why their only depictions of Chinese fashion is like Ming vases and ancient China, dynastic China, when there's a whole flourishing part of Chinese culture in the present that's kind of being overlooked. And in that documentary, Anna Wintour said something to the effect of, I don't know why this journalist is making this so political. Like, it really is that deep, and it is political. If you're choosing to dedicate an entire theme to a country and you only choose to pick the parts that meet your definition of fashion fantasy, that is very conveniently cherry picking what parts of someone else's culture work for you. There were some highlights, like the fact that Guo Pei, which I think prior to the Met Gala was not very well known to the Western audience as a master couturier and designer. Guo Pei had a moment to really shine at that event, and I think that the credence given to Chinese designers like her is something to be celebrated. So anyways, why do we care about the Met Gala, right? Kardashians, Blake Lively, what did Blake Lively wear? I think a common criticism of people who follow the Met Gala is, aren't there more important things going on in the world? Yeah, there are, and that's exactly why the Met Gala is so fun, because it's escapism. It is a night of glamour and frivolity, celebrating fashion, and ultimately raising money for something that is a charitable cause. So don't yuck my yum. But why do we care about the Met Gala? Number one, this is what is described as the Super Bowl of fashion. Every year they come up with a theme. It is a highly exclusive event. And anytime people learn about an exclusive event, they are immediately very invested in who is cool enough to attend. It provides a theater of aspiration. It is an opportunity for amazing fashion moments because notable designers bring their all to dressing their guests. It is a moment for culture making. So, what role does Anna Wintour and the committee play? The structure of how the Met Gala is organized is thus. The theme is decided by Andrew Bolton, the Costume Institute's chief curator, which is then presented to the museum director and president before it's ultimately approved. Anna Wintour has almost consistently organized the event since 1995. She is one of the lead chairs of the event, and every year the Met Gala has a committee of co-chairs, which are responsible for the guest list, the menu, assisting interior designers, the decorations. This year's co-chairs are Bad Bunny, Chris Hemsworth, Jennifer Lopez, Anna Wintour, and Zendaya. So, who goes to these events and how does one go to these events? So, obviously first, you have to be invited. And each ticket is 50 grand. Individual seats like 50,000 at a time, or for an entire table of people, which is 300 grand. The people who buy these tickets are designers. Versace, Tom Brown. As much as it is a way to raise money for a charitable cause, it is a way for these brands to market themselves. This is a highly spectated event, an opportunity for fashion designers to showcase their haute couture work, which is very rare. Haute couture dresses are one of a kind, one of one. You get sewn into the dress. There are no sizes. And the customers for these kinds of dresses are exceedingly wealthy, high net worth individuals that are oftentimes also very private about their lives. So the fact that we have an event where designers can bring their best and brightest couture is a real treat. It really is a night where people get to appreciate the best of fashion, the most creative minds, and it gives us a glimpse into what each fashion designer or fashion house is inspired by at the moment. So these designers will buy the tickets and invite people who inspire them, invite their muses. For example, last year, Versace brought Anne Hathaway, Prabal Gurung brought Anouk Yai. And speaking of like who goes to these events and how they are paid for, 1 or 2 Met Galas ago, there was so much criticism for AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Congresswoman representing New York, attended the Met Gala and her dress said "tax the rich," which is ironic because you're at an event that's full of the rich and famous. Apparently, after the gala, several vendors, including those who did Miss Ocasio-Cortez's hair and makeup, tried repeatedly to follow up with her staff for payment. Apparently she had a couple thousands of dollars of unpaid expenses from the 2021 Met Gala that she delayed payment for. However, the Congresswoman said in testimony that she did not know about the delays and that she had always intended to pay. So, tea. The dress is rented by the designer Aurora James, who is the founder of Brother Vellies. Last year's theme was Karl Lagerfeld, A Line of Beauty, which was in honor of Karl Lagerfeld, who had passed away that year, the very famous designer who transformed Chanel, Fendi, and Chloe. My favorite look from Karl Lagerfeld, A Line of Beauty, was probably Thames. Thames was wearing this amazing, gorgeous Robert I dress, or it had to be Anouk Yai in Praval Garang. Like, that woman looked just goddess, jaw dropped, like she won the night for me. In the years of 2022, 2021, one of my favorites was Bella Hadid wearing her kind of gilded age lady of the night dress. Let's see if I can find it actually. Yeah, Bella Hadid wore a leather Burberry gown that was very structured and corseted, and she had these lace tights. It was very sexy and sumptuous and promiscuous. 2019 Camp Notes on Fashion. The best one had to be Lady Gaga. She is the queen of camp. She came with a whole entourage. Lady Gaga was wearing Brandon Maxwell, and she had a whole like 3-part transformation to her Met Gala look where she like changed outfits as she walked down the red carpet. It was performance art. There's nothing more camp than Gaga. 2018 was also an amazing year. Heavenly Bodies, fashion, and the Catholic imagination. This was the year where Rihanna dressed up as the Pope. Iconic, one of my favorite looks. I'd have to say my second favorite look was Zendaya as Joan of Arc. So good. I think 2018 was a theme where people really knew how to dress for the theme. And the deeper through time you go, the more nascent the Met Gala becomes. In the early 2000s, dressing up for the Met Gala as this big red carpet event was not as much of a thing. Amber Valletta talked about it once where she was made fun of for really dressing to the theme. Some of my favorite historical Met Gala fashion beef is Stella McCartney wearing a ripped up t-shirt to the 1999 Met Gala. Met Gala theme was rock style. She didn't realize like what the context behind the Met Gala was, so she just DIY'd these cotton t-shirts, like ripped them up, and it said rock royalty, and that's what she wore to the Met Gala. Iconic behavior. So, all this talk about the context, the history, the tea behind the Met Gala, but what is this year's theme? This year's theme is Sleeping Beauty's Reawakening Fashion, which is all about clothing that is so fragile it can no longer be worn, aka old ass clothes, which is exciting for me as a fashion history nerd because people really don't make clothes the way they used to. I have this book from Penguin Random House that chronicles fashion throughout the ages from like the beginning of, known civilizations. When you get to past the Middle Ages of Europe and you get to the Elizabethan era, there is this explosion of advanced tailoring and dressmaking techniques that is just absolutely stunning and lost in time because these are garments that will never be made in the same way again. Painstaking hand labor because there were no sewing machines at that time. Dresses encrusted with precious gems, pearls, you name it. Embroidery of the finest degree. Yes, like being under a monarchy kind of sucks, but also the fashion was poppin'. So I really hope to see some old shit there, like some old rare dresses. I know that the Costume Institute is likely going to showcase some of Alexander McQueen's more ephemeral looks, like the butterfly dress, the Voss dress, which is made of mollusk shells. These are being exhibited because they are incredibly fragile. But I really love this theme because it is so fitting for the Costume Institute and kind of breaks down the fourth wall between the viewer of the Met Gala, who usually doesn't really understand what the Costume Institute does, and what the Costume Institute does, which is restore, rehabilitate, and preserve fragile, old methods of dressmaking and the sartorial arts. These dresses require highly skilled labor that is completely lost in time. I expect a majority from the 1900s just because that's what we have the most of. Some from the 1800s. I expect to see some Charles Frederick Worth dresses. Charles Frederick Worth is often credited as the father of haute couture. He was the one that dressed Empress Eugenie, but he's credited as the father of, because he popularized the notion of having presentations with models and essentially early fashion shows where clients would come to his salon to see what dresses could be bought or the looks that were on display for that season. Before then, people would have, like a family would have a tailor that they would go to and say, hey, I want to make a dress that looks like XYZ. So he kind of flipped it on its head and became one of the first like designers. So I expect to see some Charles Frederick Worth in there as well. I have a few TikToks about historical dresses that I hope to see. I did a little bit of a deep dive into Elizabethan dress. I really hope Alexander McQueen, that has taken a lot of inspiration from that era, brings some archival looks or some interesting reinterpretations of that history back. Another thing I think will be referenced a lot is 18th century French fashion, basically Marie Antoinette core, which is probably one of the heights of dressmaking and French haute couture. Obviously, she was a very fashionable woman. That reputation precedes her. But I think Marie Antoinette has been a style icon for so many fashion designers. Marie Antoinette has inspired Moschino several times. Jeremy Scott has made Marie Antoinette campy dresses, the cake dress. I also think we might see some dresses that are inspired by Jean Lanvin, who was a very prominent female couturier of her time in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Madame Grès. These are all dresses that are like in the early 1900s, which naturally makes them ephemeral and fragile just due to the nature of time and using silks and non-synthetic fabrics, which decompose a lot easier over time. Now, we've talked a lot about historical Met Gala, the current Met Gala. Let's talk about future Met Gala themes. If I could be Andrew Bolton or Anna Wintour, I would love to see a theme on film stars and Hollywood culture and the importance of costume designers, theater, and filmmaking. I made a TikTok about that, so I'll put it in right here so
if I had
you can
the
reference
power.
it. Another idea that I think would be a breeding ground for creativity, innovation, culture making would be a theme centered around artificial intelligence. In 2016, the theme was Manus and Machina, Manus ex Machina, Fashion in an Age of Technology, which was focused on the dichotomy between handmade and machine-made fashion. But I think since 2016, technology has advanced in a way that has far outpaced these notions of handmade. The methods of making fashion haven't changed too much, but the way that fashion has been perceived, the way that consumer behavior occurs, the way that technology plays a role into the lens in which we view fashion has dramatically changed. We are becoming an increasingly digital world. We are constantly incorporating technologies into the way that we interact with fashion, between the way that augmented reality is used in our phones, is used across social media apps to create filters for us to try on makeup, for us to try on clothes. There are so many interesting ways that we could use the Met Gala as a thought exercise to push designers into an age where we are using AI in a way to assist our designing, as opposed to being scared that it's gonna take our jobs away. Since 2016, the public understanding of what AI is and what AI can do, these themes could be explored so well, especially by designers like Iris van Herpen, for example. Iris van Herpen is a Dutch designer who, fun fact, used to be a ballerina before becoming a designer, but many of her looks are 3D printed because they are very sculptural, very mobile in a way. I saw one of her harnesses in the Costume Institute at the Met a couple months ago for their exhibit Women Dressing Women. And the entire thing is 3D printed. Some designers have even explored the idea of connectedness on the internet. So for example, Kim Shui, Spring Summer 23, I believe, had a dress that was made up of images sourced from the internet. As younger designers, as the consumer consciousness becomes more and more aware of AI, I see people craving to understand how it'll be used in fashion. So that's another idea. By the way, Andrew Bolton, if you like my ideas, call me. I'd love to help you curate this. Another one that I think would be interesting is empires, dress inspired by monarchs in historical empires. And I think this is a really fun way to incorporate other cultures besides just the Western culture. Obviously, you have the British Empire, the French Empire, the Dutch Empire. Obviously, there's also the Chinese dynastic empire, the Middle Eastern Empire, the Abbasid Empire, for example. Obviously, when we're talking about a star-studded event full of ball gowns and the highest of high fashion, nothing is more fun than royal dress. Nothing is more fun than dressing up like a king or a queen from a particular point in history or culture. And I think this also really encourages diverse designers, diverse attendees. I think this one could be really fun. The most fun parts of fashion history are looking at the fashion of queens and kings, from Queen Elizabeth, fashion icon, Marie Antoinette, Empress Cixi from, the Dowager Empress Cixi from the last Chinese dynasty, who was notoriously a fashionista. There are endless ways to interpret this theme and promote inclusion and diversity and fashion history across multiple different cultures, which I think the Met Gala needs to do more of without appropriating. My last theme that I think would be really fun for the Met Gala to explore is sustainable futures. They've had some themes somewhat around nature. This year's theme also somewhat has to do with nature and fashion's relationship to the elements and the decomposition of clothes over time. But I think we could use a more literal stance. The United Nations names the fashion industry as the second most polluting of all industries, resulting in 8% of all carbon emissions and 20% of all global wastewater. And for an event that has so much visibility, that brings together the minds of all the creative fashion directors of the world, what better opportunity to gain momentum about the importance of sustainability in the fashion industry? The exhibit could be made up of garments that were made using sustainable methods, which would be really fun. And the attendees could be encouraged to pick looks from archives or newly made looks that were done with sustainable methods as well. I think Stella McCartney would be such a good designer for this because she's always been a champion for sustainability in fashion. Another one is Gabriella Hearst. I think Gabriella Hearst has always had an interest in fashion sustainability. And there are many, many more. But I think the Met Gala, as much as Anna Wintour tries not to make it political, it is political. And it really has the power to shift public perception. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed today's deep dive on the Met Gala, what it has been, what it's gonna be, and if this kind of informative, critical fashion discussion interests you, consider subscribing to my YouTube, following my TikTok or my IG. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next Monday.